I'm here with Naseem Sayani from Huge. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, I'm great. And we're live in Austin. And thank you so much for spending some time
Absolutely.
and just taking a few minutes to answer some questions.
Sure.
So you've had a lot of success as a lifetime consultant, Booz, IBM Global Services. Now you're at Huge.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of help us understand. Tell me that story. How did that come about?
It's been a really fun progression. I spent about 5 years at IBM doing technology consulting work, so helping to implement big enterprise solutions to help companies grow. Went to business school, transitioned to strategy, joined Booz I was there for about 7 years, doing more top-down strategy, which all took the lens of digital really quickly. So that combination then put me right in front of the agency world, because the depth of tech and the understanding of strategy and being deep in digital just made the agency world so appealing that there was a lot I could bring to it. So I made the hop.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And so how did Huge end up on your radar? Like, how did that sort of
It's
come
a bit
about?
of a funny story. So the digital work that I was doing at Booz, we had gotten to a point where we were handing really great strategy documents to our clients' agency partners to then execute, inevitably getting the call back that something had worked or had not worked. And so we decided we wanted to help it work more often. Hired on UX UI, hired on tech, and started to be the agency along with the strategist to our clients. So I actually built the agency that was inside of Booz & Company over the last 2 years, and we started competing against the agencies, and I was running into Huge at every other pitch because we were now going after the same work. So it made it really interesting, and I started to meet the people, and I said, God, if I really want to get deep in digital, much deeper, I just got to go do the agency thing. So I had to make the leap.
So you picked your best vendor that you had
Yes,
worked with, basically,
or
your
who
best
I
partner.
had competed against,
Right,
and said, I
right.
got to go work there.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because today's conference is all about adapting to human behavior in the connected age.
Yeah.
What's your take on the connected age, and how do you think things are different today than they were, say, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So connected age for me is really fascinating, because if you consider things like the first iPhone that literally came out about 7 years ago, 7.
Yeah.
Which is not that long ago, and yet the entire world has changed, right? We're all walking around with 3 and 4 devices apiece. Like, I have a phone and an iPad in my bag, and I have to have those things to operate every day. So if you consider what's coming next, like, we really don't understand where we're headed next. So the topic of this conference is so fitting, because there's so many smart people all touching digital in different ways, and just the types of things that could come out of this are just going to be enormous, because that one device changed the world, and the next simple change is going to then push us even further.
Right, and it was obviously enough to attract you to get into this space where people are making those things and that sort of thing. So how do you think the connected age shift changes advertising and marketing? How I guess agencies, for lack of a better term, view strategy?
Yeah.
Because that's always been an interesting thing, right?
Yeah, and the agencies, they have always done strategy in some shape or form. So when you think about how do you design a CMS, or how do you develop the messaging strategy, or how do you communicate to consumers, strategy has always been there, but it's been embedded in those other capabilities. What the ask is now is actually to pull all of that up 2, 3, 4 levels to help our clients ask why they want that messaging strategy. Why do you want to build that app? Why do you want to target millennials? Because if we don't validate that it's tying back to their business in some way, we're building a lot of solutions that don't sustain. And now we have to help our clients build solutions that sustain. So it's not just one more app in the market, it's one more app that's going to work, and it's going to build business, and it's going to drive revenue.
Right.
And that's why the push on strategy coming upstream is so important for the agencies.
And so do you think that the agencies are going through a process of trying to figure out what strategy means now to them and
I think so.
And that sort of thing?
I think so, because I think it's a different way to flex the muscle, right? And it's a different way of thinking about how we ask questions. When we get an RFP, we're very used to just responding and saying, oh yeah, we can do that. We have all these capabilities, and pack them all in a bag and send it over. But now we have to really take a step back and go, God, why are they asking this question? Where's their business headed? How are they trying to compete? And then bring the right bag of tricks to it to help them get there.
Right. And I know you and I share the viewpoint that there's this convergence of consulting firms sort of coming down in the space, and advertising firms kind of coming up into that space. And what's kind of happening there? How do you sort of describe that, and what's your viewpoint? I mean, obviously you made a change to the ad side and things like that. How do you see that happening, and did you see it happening when you were at Booz?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's funny because the consulting firms have been very quickly adding on UX UI and technology, because I was doing that in my consulting life. We were trying to build those capabilities, and the agencies are just as quickly coming the other way. And it's creating a space where we're competing against each other now. What I think, and the reason I made the leap, is because I think the agencies are better placed to compete in that new space that's being created, because the depth of creative understanding, the really deep know-how on what works on the ground really only sits in the agencies. The consulting firms are very smart, don't get me wrong, because that's where my training comes from, but we're just not close enough to the ground to make it real fast enough. Whereas the agencies, we've got to get smarter on strategy, we've got to pull the people out of the consulting firms, and then we're going to be able to have really smart conversations so quickly because we've been on the ground where it's worked and it hasn't worked before.
Right, right. So what do you think, like when you came over to Huge, what was the first thing you sort of said, this is like what I'm going to work on, you know, and this is what I'm going to try to do quickly first, low-hanging fruit, that sort of stuff,
Yeah,
right?
There were a couple of things. One was helping the teams understand what strategy is, because there's a notion of strategy inside the building, which doesn't always jive with what our clients are actually asking for. So really saying it's not just about, oh, we have these options and let's present the options, and we have a lot of really deep insights from stakeholder interviews that inform those options, but really laddering that back up to what's happening in the market and outside the building and saying, here's why, right? There's 3 concepts, beautiful design concepts. This is the one we think you should do because this is the one that wins tomorrow. Right. Not wins today, but wins tomorrow. And helping the team think that way was one of the first things I wanted to do. So it's still a work in progress.
Sure.
But that's what I'm trying to start with so that everyone feels like everyone can be strategic, right? It just happens within a different frame. Second thing is just finding the right set of people to be in the building, to be the strategy brain source of the organization. And that's a harder challenge, but that's the 2 things is build. One is educate the organization, and 2, build a team so that we can then go to market in a better way.
Okay, that's cool. So what about so in the consulting side, like business strategy is always the thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like understanding how businesses actually work, not just sort of like the tactical things that are being asked for.
Yeah.
How do you see that when we talk about that consulting piece coming down, and how do you think agencies are going to work with that piece, right?
Yeah, and it's a harder thing for agencies to do because it's not kind of inherent in the DNA in a way. But I think we can get there through probably one of 2 things. One is that making the core agency work we do smarter. So when we do things like discovery and competitive landscape assessment, not just saying, hey, here's what's going on and here's what their sites look like. Here's what's going on, here's what their sites look like, here's the decisions they appear to be making, and here's what their sites could look like tomorrow. Okay. And if we make that progression of what things will look like tomorrow, now we're thinking about the business and we're thinking about how they compete. And if we can do that better, then we're going to be in rooms where we get entree into those other conversations. Like, oh, great, I can compete better, but how do I sustain it? How do I nurture it? How do I make sure I keep building the content that communicates to you the way you want to be communicated to? I've got to help you build a team to do that. So now I can get into operating model. Now I can get into resources. Now I can get into talent development, which are all the things that consulting firms are doing. But now I've tied it back to something I've actually helped you think about differently, which is the experience tomorrow. Now I got to help you sustain it.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're coming into the agency space from the consulting space at an interesting time where digital, where Huge and a lot of other organizations made a namesake, or a namesake for themselves, sort of had a lot of growth, built a big brand in that space. What do you think digital means to you today?
It's a funny thing because digital to me, we've gone from a place where we were talking about strategies that were digital first, and then they were mobile first,
right.
And now it's here, right? Like you can't really build a digital strategy without going, what are we solving for? Because the world has already changed.
Yeah. So
now it's just how you do business, right? It's not really like, oh, we do this and we do digital. It's like, no, we just do business. And the lens of digital has to be throughout all of it. And it's a hard thing for clients to think through because they've built their businesses over 20, 30, 40 analog years. Right. And they're having to turn right and left. But that's just the nature of the world we're in now, is that we're not building for digital, we're building in digital. And that we have to be operating that way, otherwise it's not going to work.
So have you started putting together a strategic team at Huge, pulling in people from outside resources?
I have, yeah.
What kind of traits are you looking for, characteristic attributes?
Yeah.
Are you hiring people that have agency experience, maybe come from the consulting world, but a mixture of the 2, or what's kind of your thoughts on that?
It's a bit of a mixture of the 2. I mean, the ideal profile I'm looking for is somebody that has come out of a consulting firm, right? Has the horsepower and the rigor and the problem-solving skills that come with that kind of experience, but has been deep in digital and perhaps has also built product, right? Maybe spent time within an agency or come from a Booz digital type of experience that I came from, where we actually built product, but we were strategists. It's a really hard combination to find because there's not many people that have that mix. But there's also the profile that comes from agency that has been strategic, that has been exposed to enough of that CEO level thinking that they can come in and do it. So it comes from one or the other,
right.
But it's a combination of rigor, of understanding of digital, and some deep understanding of having built product that makes a person in this digital strategy role much more effective.
Sure. So we haven't talked about this topic before, but I think it's interesting. Yeah. A lot of agencies think, they've always lumped strategy in with like planning.
Yeah.
Something in SoDA that we've talked about a lot recently is sort of the role of the planner and the role of the strategist. And you having such a business strategic background, sort of coming down into this space, what do you feel the difference is between planning and strategy? Are they the same thing? Are they different? Are they complementary? How does that
They're
sort of work?
Different, but they are complementary. I think you can do planning without full view into the strategy, but I don't think it's as robust that way. Mm-hmm. I do think that the business strategy has to come first. So understanding of objectives, of what we want to get to, where we're trying to be, what our metrics want to be, that in some way has to be laid out, even if it's small form, and then that should inform the planning you do to deliver against those metrics. So those two, I think they're highly complementary, but the business strategy for me, in how my brain works, has to lead.
Right.
Otherwise, the planning will work, but you may not get as far because you're not tying it back to the business.
Have you had a chance yet to implement some of that business planning stuff inside of Huge on the front end? And if so, what have you seen as the effect kind of downstream with people that end up working on the projects, delivering the projects, making those things, and how has it enhanced their ability to be successful?
It's been really amazing to see the difference. So things like when we talk about, there's a couple of clients where we've layered in some simple business strategy elements into the work, where you then talk about the objectives of the business and what they want to achieve, and you get to concepts coming out of creative and say, here's the 3 concepts that we think are great for your business. And now the team feels more comfortable layering in rationale. Here's why, here's how it competes, pros and cons, and then trade-offs.
Right.
If you choose this one, you're not getting this. If you choose this, you're not getting this, and vice versa. And seeing the team have that kind of conversation where they're actually now engaging at a thought partner level with their client rather than I'm the creative and here's my great idea, makes the client feel really good, makes the person feel really good, and we get to a much better answer at the end of it. So we're starting to see that happen more because they're just taking simple tools and embedding it into how they communicate what they already do.
Yeah. And do you notice that they get more engaged and that sort of thing?
Yeah,
too?
They do. And they feel like they have more ownership of it and they understand the mission and what the outcome is. So it's a beautiful experience,
right?
But it's actually going to be great for the business too because they're going to be able to do all these great things they haven't been able to do before. And it's going to drive metrics and it's going to grow. And so they feel much more ownership over helping that business grow rather than just building what is a beautiful experience.
Right.
They get more reach into other things the company's thinking about.
Right, and it's not so, there's like an end of the line. It's like this thing's
right,
gonna keep
yeah,
going
it becomes an evolution very, very, very quickly.
Right. So, thinking back about sort of the transition into this space, was there a moment where you sort of had a thought where you were like, wait a minute, I have to make this change because I'm seeing something and it triggered something in you?
Yeah.
Or was it, is there not a moment, or was there one? Or
there was a little bit of one of those aha moments where just watching how the consulting firms, we were coming rapidly downstream and trying to conquer a space that the agencies were already in.
Yep.
And while we're very strategic and very smart and we can do creative and we can do tech, we would always run up against but my agency built my app, or they understand how my site works, or they're already embedded in the team, and we already, their creative director already knows how our brand works.
Right.
And we didn't have that leverage, right? And so, and I know in the agency now, the other direction, they go, we already have McKinsey doing that. Or And that's okay. That doesn't bother me as much, but I kept seeing the agencies were already so deeply ingrained in how the team thought about marketing and how they built experiences that to really create the impact, I needed to be there. And so I said, I'm just going to go do that, right?
Yeah.
And if the agencies are coming upstream anyway, there's such an opportunity to have us be more strategic about how we think and team and engage with our clients that I can help do a lot there to make those people that are already ingrained do much better work and be just so much smarter about how we deliver on what we already do.
Right. Yeah, so that's obviously an interesting challenge for clients is that they've migrated into trying to get into that strategic work. So a lot of them do have a foot in kind of both worlds, right? They're working with an agency, they're working with a consulting firm.
Right.
So that's a business challenge. What do you think from a challenge aspect? What are you seeing that is one of the biggest challenges for clients as we sort of transition from, digital being a silo of an offering, right, to kind of just being everything?
Yeah, it's two things. It's speed and it's level of risk. I think are the two things that are making it what's keeping clients up at night, if you will, because you know, you've got a lot of big businesses that have built their careers over 20, 30 years of one type of business. And
right.
They need to move fast to change how they do things because everything outside their building is moving so fast. But that speed is hard to do when you're an organization that large. And then the level of risk you're trying to take, because you might have shareholders, you might have others, and you're just trying to figure out, God, I can't lose that much money, right? I've got to be calculated, I've got to be thoughtful. So speed and risk, I think, is what's becoming the hardest thing. Because meanwhile, you have so many startups just nipping away at different parts of that big organization's way of working, that they're parts of the underlying fundamentals are just being taken out. So they have to do something. And that, it's got to be keeping them up at night. I know it's what I think about when I read the paper, and it's changing how we do everything right now.
I think that's super interesting what you said about nipping away, because it's such a great, like, tiny little example or metaphor to explain kind of what happens. I think people talk about startups sometimes and they think, how is a startup going to take away this big company? But they don't. They kind of nibble away at these little tiny pieces. And you know, you have some interesting history in coming up with some easy ways for clients to be able to predict maybe like what somebody's going to try to nip away and maybe avoid those things. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know that's a long thing, but
well, there's a concept I like to use that I've done with a handful of clients called a reverse war game. War games typically are about envisioning the moves of your existing players, and it's like a multiplayer chess game, right? You go, you're going to do this, you'll do that, and I'm going to do this in response, and now we've all got our defenses up. The reverse war game turns it around. It turns it into something where imagine what new players are going to do, and imagine it, and then push the question internal. So the question that I like to ask is, if I could launch a startup today that was going to put me out of business, what would it look like?
Oh, that's a great question.
Right, and what that forces me to do, forces our clients to do, is to leave the constraints of their current business literally outside the building. I don't have 10 stores, I don't have inventory, I don't have supply chain that's already built, I don't have all those things. I'm literally trying to come at this market brand new today. What would you do different? And a really interesting example of this for me is when you think about record companies, right? Built their empires on two probably fundamental concepts. One, I sell an album, and two, ownership is important. And you consider who changed their first, Apple disrupted the first assumption. I'm not going to buy the album, I'm going to buy the song.
Right.
All of a sudden, the entire industry changed because of that simple change in the assumption. But the record companies never thought about that. They never thought about what could change in the fundamentals of my business. If they had gone through a reverse war game exercise, they may have thought about changing that assumption. Then Apple took that and changed the industry in music, but they maintained that ownership was important. Now the streaming services are taking ownership and changing that assumption. So if you the management teams that can think about that type of simple assumptions about my business, choose the ones to disrupt, and then decide if I can build that business, now you can maybe get ahead of what other startups might be thinking about against what your current model looks like.
Right. See, what I love about that so much is that, like, you would never hear that question come from an advertising agency, right? It would be,
not right now.
Here's what we're doing, you know, not right now, right? That idea of sort of, you know, what's the desired outcome of what we're trying to do here? Let's talk about that. Right? It's a different sort of conversation. You know, on the topic of disruptive innovation, why do you think innovation is important? I mean, obviously there's competitive threats, but what else drives innovation? Huge is an innovative business, obviously. And then how do you encourage your clients to be more innovative? I mean, what sort of advice do you give them? How do you get them there?
So innovation for me is really important, and for the competitive benefits that you have to have it for. It's also for talent retention, for brand positioning, for how you tell the story of who you are in the market. If innovation is not necessary, it's not a bonus or an add-on, it's almost table stakes now. You've got to have some part of your business that's pushing the envelope on what your business does, otherwise people aren't interested. Because as consumers, we're so finicky, but our standards are so high that companies that get like docile, we just go, oh, whatever, we're just gonna go to the next one. So you have to do it to stay relevant, right? And it's hard to do because it requires a different muscle to flex that you may not be used to flexing. So with clients, encouraging them to be innovative for me, it's about asking why.
Right.
Why do you want to do this? Why are we doing that? Why is that the priority? Why is that the mission? Why is that the end game? And making them articulate and verbalize more of the why requires that they think more creatively and bring forward the innovation that might be in there that they're not saying, or go back to the table and say, oh God, we haven't been innovative enough.
Right.
But I find oftentimes a lot of companies aren't asking why. And you have to ask why.
And how do you get your team, like, just curious, how do you get your team around that? Like, as a strategic team, right? Because strategy is one of those things that's, when you say that out loud sometimes to people, they're like, oh gosh, that's like, you know, everybody understands that. And the reality, it's very complex, but how do you get your team to think innovative strategically, I guess?
And it's It's an evolution. So our team, what I try to get our team to do is really be thinking about what's going on in the market much more deliberately, even if our clients aren't asking for it. So what I encourage my team to do, and this is like comes out of business school things that I did, read the paper every single day, right? And don't read all the articles, but read the headlines and read the first 3 paragraphs.
Right.
And then start to train your brain to try and predict what you might see in the paper tomorrow. This is something I used to do when I would read the paper in business school every day, is I would be like making notes on things going, oh my God, this happened, that happened. And I go, well, maybe in 2 or 3 days, this might happen.
Oh, that's cool.
And as you start to do that, you'll actually find yourself 75% kind of spot on with what ends up in the paper 2 days later. And it's a little bit crazy because you go, how could I have possibly predicted that? But you connect the dots across what's happening, across different innovation threads or industry threads, and you can start to see what's coming next.
Yeah.
And the more that we push ourselves to do that, then we can be asking better questions to our clients, and we can have a point of view that we've actually thought about already.
Yeah.
That helps to frame the why, right?
That's cool
it doesn't
too,
feel
because
awkward.
it's training your brain to sort of do that, right? Like all of a sudden you're just going to start doing that all the time. That's super cool. So I think we could talk about that stuff all day long.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to just ask a few sort of wrap up things.
Sure.
So what are the top 3 goals for your team this year? So we talked about a little bit about like what was low hanging fruit, but what are your goals? Like if you can be at the end of 2015 again, like sort of desired outcome, and say, what did I do so far? What are those kind of 3 things?
So a couple of things. One is building the team, right? That's primary. I've got 2 or 3 people now. I've got to get 2 or 3 more, maybe a few more than that. So I've got to build a team, build a capability. 2 is the end game in a year would be that there's some element of strategy, whether it is infused into the work we already do, or it's earlier stage brand positioning work, or it's later stage operating model business case work that we've done with every single client we're working with. There's some addition of strategy that we've done on top of the core agency work that was not a push, but it was an ask that we could deliver on, right? And it was a natural conversation. The third is that we are more deeply embedded in the C-level conversations, and we're actually in a place to be a very close thought partner with at least 2 or 3 more of our clients. We have some places where we do that well already. I want to add on 2 or 3 more where they always call us, even if it's not for work, but they call us for our opinion. And they want to know our point of view, and they say, hey, join this meeting because I'm asking this person this question. I want to see what you think.
Right.
2 or 3 more places where we're doing that, and we will have had a really good year.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And I bet your the whole story about why you ended up at Huge is such a great reverse sales pitch up the ladder.
Yeah.
Right, when you're trying to get Huge more of that push. So
yeah, it fits really nicely.
Yeah. So what do you think? So we're here in Austin, and everybody's here trying to predict the future and think about what's going to happen,
right.
and all that kind of stuff. What do you think we're talking about next year? This year, where's digital at? It's sort of everywhere, and behavior and blah blah.
Yeah.
What are we talking about next year?
I think there's 2 things we'll be talking about more next year. We're talking about it a bit this year, but I think it'll be more structured next year. So wearables and the Internet of Things will be bigger next year because I think it'll be more mainstream. We're at this weird inflection point with IoT where everyone's talking about it and it's like the cool jazzy thing, but there's price point problems, there's affordability problems, there's privacy problems that are actually not, we are not the sample of people to test that on because we have all this stuff, right? Yeah. But it has to go mainstream. So I feel like by next year we will have better examples of where it's gone mainstream and actually become something that common people think about, right?
Yeah,
Everyday Joe thinks about. That's one thing. The other is that the simplicity of solutions around tech I think is going to get much, much better. So we have a lot of really complicated things that are trying to solve for cloud or music or streaming. And I think we're at a point also where that's going to get hopefully much more simpler and we're solving for the underlying tech problems. That next year it's going to be about simplicity and it's going to be about IoT that's actually integrated into how we work and how we think in a way that now we're solving for the next thing. Like, okay, great, now it's here.
Right.
What happens next, right? What do we do with the data now that we have it in a way that's not just about fitness, but it's really about health because I can connect it to my healthcare provider and I can connect it to my doctor. We're going to be talking about that much more deliberately next year, I think.
Cool. Well, I appreciate all the time
Absolutely.
that you took. I know you're busy and there's lots of stuff to do here. So I appreciate it.